So that was what that question was about. Rate the effectiveness of each current form of communication. So right now you might have like a newsletter, you might be doing some social media things, you might, how are some ways that your organization currently communicates? Putting you on the spot.
Monthly newsletter.
Monthly newsletter? How long is it usually, and how do you send it out? Is it like by mail, or is it email, or both?
That's snail mail.
Okay.
And a website.
Okay.
Facebook page.
Yeah, that's pretty standard. I think most people kind of do that.
Group email.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense. So basically, for each of those things, maybe you put the email newsletter versus the one on the website versus the snail mail one, and say, like, how effective is it really? Do I read this? Is it something I use? Do I just toss it in recycling or the trash or whatever? So getting a feel for how effective it is a really good thing to know. How often do you want to receive? For us, it's a campus, but sometimes you send things too often. So there's a lot of people that are like, once a month, tops, quarterly even. I mean, it depends on your audience, it depends on your group, but you don't want them to unsubscribe to you. You want them to still tune in and not be overwhelmed, or even just, there's ways to kind of snooze it and just have it go to a folder, maybe I'll get to it, and they never will. So finding where they're at with, like, maybe it will be a monthly thing, maybe you're attached to the weekly and maybe they just want it once a month. So figuring out what the people really want in that regard is really important. We also were considering new forms of communication, and there's a lot of them out there. Like, I'm sure with social media, you might be on Facebook, maybe Instagram or Twitter, and you're considering another platform. And so this is kind of feeling out, like, are your people really on Twitter? Is it worth the effort to go in and maybe find somebody professional to help you with those things, or is it just not something they do? Are they still on Facebook? Do they like the email newsletter? Like, would they prefer having video announcements or text alerts? A lot of people like those, but maybe they're too much. So kind of figuring out what people really want in that regard is important. What information do you want that you currently feel like you're not getting? This was that kind of getting at why those people were saying, why didn't I hear about that? Because it's like, well, what information are you missing? What do you think is going on that you're not a part of? Because a lot of times they already do have access to a lot of that information, but they just may not realize it. Excuse me. But getting a feel for what they need more of. If you do a lot of internal events and they want more personnel announcements, like who's new on staff or things like that. People want to know those kind of things, or maybe they don't want to know. Maybe they just want some brief things. So that's another thing to consider. What do you receive too much of? Sometimes there's a lot of noise with all of the information. So sometimes I love knowing, I think I used the example before, I love knowing what's going on with the youth group, but maybe I just want to hear that they're going on a trip to the water park versus you need to bring sunscreen and a water bottle and make sure you get to this place at this time. And all the information about all these events is in one spot, and it's too much. So what's creating noise? What do you want less of? And sometimes that can be a painful process because people are really married to the structure of their current newsletter usually. They don't want to change things, and people feel maybe a little insulted. It's important to be careful about like how you approach people in that. But it's not that we want to exclude your information. We're just going to be a little more concise with it and be more intentional with how we're telling people about it. And then this one was really the most helpful one in the whole survey, actually, the open-ended question, which is there any other feedback you want to provide? And that gave us some of our best insights into things that we changed. In fact, one of the things was communicating with the staff. We divided up. There was a daily email that we weren't sure if it was working or not, but apparently people liked it. I was surprised because I thought a daily email was too much, but we got feedback that they liked it. So it is lengthy. We did start putting the new information at the top, which was more helpful. So if you just want the new stuff, you don't have to scan through the whole thing. We did also start doing a staff newsletter, so that way a lot of departments were feeling disconnected from other departments. So letting them know what each department is up to, what are some changes that are on, because communications is different than advancement, than admissions. I'm speaking from a a higher ed level, but that's true of every organization, that what the teachers are up to versus administration, any initiatives that are going on, what might affect me. There's been some times we've had events on campus that they're like, why are there all these extra people here? And nobody knew about it. Or there'd be times, there was one building getting renovated, and because of a lack of communication, we did have a conference scheduled during there in those buildings that were being renovated. So that was, fun to sort through. We're like, we're professionals here, we got this. So it looked a little bad, but it's a learning curve, of course. But the way, oops, I went backward. But really what a communication audit is about is evaluating all of your current forms of communication and figuring out how we can improve. There's a lot of trial and error, of course. Like, it's not going to be perfect. And I don't know if you guys, has anybody done a survey with their groups before? What did you use to do the survey?
We did two things. We did SurveyMonkey, we used that for electronic use, but we also did paper
Okay,
for both.
that makes
And
sense.
we tallied everything.
So the paper one, did you mail it to them or did you do it in person? Or
We did it as they picked it up on Sunday morning.
okay, I really recommend that one because they're a captive audience, kind of, but they're there. And we use SurveyMonkey for ours too. It's a pretty good, easy to use software. You see a lot of your results in graphs and things. It's really good visually to be able to share. Then we shared all the information with the campus. And that's huge too. If you do a survey with your group and you share all the results with them, they feel like they're a part of the process. Like, here's what you guys thought, and here's our next steps. And they feel empowered, and they're already less out of the loop. They're a part of things. So I also, at the end, I have some resources. There's a few other survey things I looked into and tried out. Oh, yeah.
With SurveyMonkey, just so people are aware, you can only get 10 responses on the free version.
Yes. On the resources page I put together, I put a little bit of the pros and cons of each one. Some have limits, some have unlimited. Although sometimes limits are good with surveys because you don't, I know there's like so many questions that and sometimes you can do phases of surveys. If you have 20 questions that you want to ask, maybe do 10 this week, wait a week, do another 10 so people don't get exhausted, burned out, and they're like, oh, they want my opinion again. I mean, as much as people like to talk and share their opinion. But there's kind of some golden rules when it comes to surveys. You want to have a conversational tone. People tend to respond more when it sounds conversational, when it's a little informal. It doesn't have to be rigid, and this is our serious survey. Keep your respondent comfortable. Don't kind of bombard them with questions. Give them all the necessary background they need. Keep it as concise as possible. Work on the flow. People tend to reply more easily and quickly if they're asked a question that follows a logical sequence, if things kind of relate to each other and they're already thinking along those lines. Easy structuring. Keep them free from anything ambiguous. Keep it really clear. Goal-oriented questions, and one idea per question. If you ask, like, do you think this is working and fun? And they say no, they're like, well, was it because it wasn't working or because it wasn't fun? So like you pick one of those and make it a question. And if it doesn't all fit in this week, you can do it in a series, like I said. Strategically incorporate a rating scale. If you're doing like a 1 to 5, keep it consistent, like on a scale of 1 to 5. And then the next one is like, do you think it was good, very good, or, just keep it consistent throughout so they don't have to rethink over, okay, now what do I think? Am I a 3 or a 5 if you're going to do a rating scale, just keep it the same throughout. Use definite questions, like that will give you a yes or a no as much as possible so you get really clear answers. And research shows that there's a decline in participation if it's over 20 minutes or 30 questions, but I think that's way too much. But that's the research, so that's out there. But I say 5 minutes and 10 questions at most, under 5. I tried to make mine under 5, and we had good participation. But really, think about the number of times that you've been asked to, can we get your opinion? Will you give us some of your time? And you really, you might care about the organization, but how much time do we really have? How much focus do we really have? We're all kind of a little bit mentally drained at times. Like I said, the top insights from our survey was that the Blue News, that daily thing, was more helpful than we thought. So you do get some surprises. Be prepared that if your ideas that you're gunning for going in are not going to work, and just go with the data from what you explore. We also, part of the changes with the Blue News and the staff news, we're giving people a portal. We tried to automate things as much as possible, where they go to a form, they put in their thing, and they submit it, and then the newsletter gets generated, which is really, really cool if that can happen. And that way, getting updates from every department to share, they all want them, but they don't want to turn them in. So encouraging people as much as possible and saying a sentence or two just to let us know what's going on. It doesn't have to be a novel. It's okay. So some of the, and also we use Slack. Have you guys heard of Slack? Does anybody use it? What do you guys think? What do you think of Slack?
I like it.
What do you tend to, how do you, where is it most useful in your work?
I think that younger people use it more, trying to get exchanges like from our pastor. Not so much, but that's okay. So it's a tool in our toolbox that is useful. It is not a replacement of anything.
And you're, like, when you say younger people, like younger people on staff, or like, do you also have?
Volunteers.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah.
If I don't know what Slack is, what is it?
Oh, okay. So it's like you're like, we're just slacking. It's like an instant messaging software, but it does more than that. And it's really handy for things that it doesn't make sense to make it a phone call. And you can answer real quick if you're in a meeting. It's there, and it can be on your phone, it can be on your computer. I'll get little alerts, so that way they're like, I need this, right now, we're having this thing, you can put out a fire really quickly and move on with your day, but also you can share documents. It's a really, really super worthwhile thing, and we've expanded our use of it because I cannot tell you how much it helps with our workflow. It really, all the ways that you can instantly get, like, oh, I need that photo, do you know where it is? Boom, versus several email exchanges or a long thread where everybody is involved and you're trying to figure out where you even need to respond, or like a phone call that you're like, I respect you, I like you, but I don't have time for this. So the expediency of the information you can put out there and exchange. So that was one of the things that we got out of this survey as well, was the expanding our Slack use. And it's one of those things, like you said, there's some people that it's harder to get on board. They're used to communicating in a different way. And that's something to always approach with care. But the training for it being intentional about, hey, why don't we sit down for an hour at lunch? If you find some good people that you can hook them up with, it's not too bad to learn. It's really a fairly intuitive software.
How do you spell it?
Slack, like SLACK.
It's an app that you can load on your phone too. How we use it too is think about it like with the ministries, and all of the leaders of the ministries come together. That's a whole lot of emails and chatter going on, but you separate it out by what they call channels. And so you've got women's ministry channels. If you have nothing to do with women's ministry, just ignore that channel. And
Yeah.
you just go with what you want. So it's kind of efficient that way.
Yeah. Slack is free to get started on. If you want longer archival, that kind of thing, they go to paid plans. Challenge and hope on that. Challenge is that Slack explicitly in their nonprofit rules disallows any religious organization. So that's a challenge. However, they were just bought out by Salesforce, and there's a little administrative pressure changing that. So at least at the seminary, we were able to get on for nonprofit pricing, and so I think that policy's shifting. So you might try that if you decide you need some of those paid features, but we went with the free version for 3 or 4 years and never noticed a difference.
Yeah, and we haven't really had those difficulties. But the channel thing is a really good point, because it's how we can, especially when we've got so many events coming up. We had our annual symposia is a big deal, and there was something going on with the deaconesses and something else. Each has their own channel. If it doesn't involve you, you can ignore it. And that way you're like, oh, what did I need to know about that? You can go to that specific place, see a whole conversation. It's fairly brief. It's not like an email thread. And it's really handy. So I really recommend that. It helps a lot with keeping people in touch with each other and knowing what's going on. One of the things too is Holy Cross Church in Fort Wayne. They did a reevaluation of their communications not too long ago, and I liked some of the things that they came up with out of that. Which one was a one-page newsletter. They got it down to one page. I know there's a lot of many pages newsletters. In fact, I used to edit one that was many pages because I mean there's a lot of cool things going on at the church, but it's a one page that you can pick up outside the service. You can put on your fridge. On the back are the prayer requests. So keeping, again, it's the one word headline versus all the details of bringing the sunscreen in the water and all those things. So people want to know, but they don't need to know everything. So I would really recommend that. And it's not eliminating any information. It's just changing how we put it out and maybe where we put it out. So if you find out that there's a group of people that aren't reading the newsletter anyway, maybe you put all their updates on Facebook or on Instagram. So that is an option. And I really like this concept is you don't need to have all of the answers to get started. You just need to ask the right questions. So with your people, finding out, you need to meet them where they're at in terms of communication and not try to bend them to how you want to communicate. And part of this communication audit, there's an internal side of things, then there's an external side of things, and that's a whole nother animal. I may do another presentation about that next time, but that side of things is making sure everybody's on the same page in terms of everybody using the same logo when you're sending things out, the same colors. There's a Pantone number for all the colors. Everybody using the same font, the same header, and having an accessible file somewhere on a common shared drive where everybody can access these things. And a lot of that, not everybody has a brand guide for their organization. It's really helpful to have a style brand guide. But you don't have to develop a full-on one. Some have really professional-looking ones, and you can go through and it's pages and pages, and it looks intimidating. But even just having a folder on a shared drive where everybody you need an officially approved picture of students or of our building or anything. You have a space, there's photos, there's logos, there's fonts. Everybody knows where to get it, and everybody's on the same page. So that way, things you're sending, your brand, your story stays consistent through everything that you're doing. So that is, I had on the next, I'm hoping if you hold up your phone, this is how you get our resources page that we put together, where I went over, I have a few of the survey things on there. Let me know if it doesn't work, and I can help you out in another way. But on there we have a few of the survey things I reviewed. Hopefully I found out, we use SurveyMonkey, like I said, but Google actually has a Google Forms thing. I don't know if how many of you are Google users for your organization? Everything's on Google Docs. Yeah, it's nice to work on those because it's easy to share things. And so the Google Forms is fairly connected with all of that, so they're kind of nice too. And it's already free and a part of where you already are, so that might be worth looking into. Also on that page are resources from our other presentations that we're doing while we're here, so they're all there. But I guess that is the main thing. Did anybody have any questions? I know that was a lot that I said to all of you, but any questions about anything? Are there any particular internal communication problems that you're looking to solve that maybe we could get some more insight on if we talked about them? Yeah.
I don't know how to phrase this without sounding.
You sound fine, no worries.
So, we have an amazing gal who's been there for 16 years, and she does all the print, very by the book, very old school. Our new pastor is very planning center and new technology and 5 years in the future. Their communication styles are not meshing well, and I'm trying to figure out a way to be that mediator to an extent between the old school lengthy novels that are published many times in print versus his style of quick blast, hey, it's great to see you. So do you have any suggestions on marrying those two different
Yeah.
styles?
And we've gone through a lot of that at the seminary too. There are people that have been there for decades, and there are a lot of newcomers there too. So there are a lot of growing pains. Part of it is helpful if there's baby steps with little intentional, helpful training sessions, and also giving on sides that, is this the hill I want to die on with you? Like there are some, for the newer comer, there's a level of respect and kind of what could I give on this point? Is there a little extra thing I could do to show her some respect and how I admire what she already does? I worked with somebody at a restaurant and we did not mesh, and that's usually not common with me. I usually get along with people, but she didn't like me. And I thought I was doing a good job. And eventually I was just like, well, she works different than me, so I'm going to figure out how to change little things in my work. And gradually, little by little, she started liking me. Like, I just changed how I did certain things that didn't matter that much. Like, I mean, this was a restaurant, so it was like how I stocked the napkins or some, nonsense that doesn't even matter. But because it doesn't, not the hill to die on. It didn't matter, so I could give on those little places. And actually, she's like one of my best friends now. She started opening up to me. She has had a lot of trauma and all kinds of things in her life, so it was really quite an amazing experience. But I think giving on little areas wherever you feel you can. And I work with a lot of our advancement office is the old school generation. A lot is up here. And they're really cool people, and really investing in the relationship too is really important. I've gotten to know a lot of them, gone to, when they lost a loved one, gone to a funeral, talked to them a lot. So over time, really caring about them as people and showing that, and like between the respect and building the relationship. Once the relationship is there and it's really good, they're more likely to kind of open up and want to try more things. So I think relationship is super important too. And if they feel respected, that's a huge point. But yeah.
Yeah, to that a little bit, I think for different communication channels, your tone and type of content changes quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's kind of intuitive, but it sounds like what she's doing works for the communication channel she manages. And so maybe what he's doing, the shorter, faster things are more useful as Twitter or SMS notifications or push. But using one to drive content and clicks over to the longer form, that's a great way to go. And so they don't become competitors. These are actually ways of supplementing one another and getting more eyeballs to see the content.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. So, any other questions? Yeah.
A comment relative to the technology versus non-technology. We've had some success with simply looking for little clues of what they might need where they're struggling with technology, and say, can I help you with that? But being very intentional.
That's a really good point, is seeing where they need help and where there's needs. Because if you could meet them there, it's less scary, it's less intimidating. Because a lot of it, we take it, especially if you've grown up with the technology, you take it for granted that it's kind of intuitive to you. And a lot of times you're like, well, why don't you want to use this? It's easier. It makes so much more sense. But I still use an old school planner because I just like to write things down. It's like, it helps me remember. But so I get it why people need certain things. It's like different forms of worship. That some people need the traditional hymns. Some people love the new. It's all worship, but it's just everybody has different needs in terms of what they need to feel, connected and everything. So, yeah.
So we did our communication audit, and we spent a year and a half probably on it. And then as we made changes, we rolled out a certain part at a certain time. So we updated the website. We rolled that out. We gave a little quick video through the service, at the end of the service, showing what the new things were.
Cool.
We switched our texting form. We did that on a particular Sunday. We gave everybody the opportunity, if they needed help after the service, we walked them through each step process in front, and then after the service we had what we call we used it for sign up geniuses, and then people that they could go to and ask for help. So it going off that point of technology.
That's a
having
very
people
cool point.
available and right there. We have 2 kiosks in our church that we set up for people that don't necessarily know how or don't have the ability at home to do certain things, sign up for things.
That's awesome.
We have it, that they can do it there.
And I love that you also did a video thing to show what's going on, because again, that's really important for getting people on board, is letting them and making them feel like a part of the team. You know, we're all in this together. We're all after, I mean, ultimately the mission is about serving God. So as much as we can clear the rest of the noise and get to the main events, I love that you're informing people like that and also having resources. That's really cool. And that's good advice.
And talking about, you know, just different things that you think. We went in with the idea that maybe we can take away our weekly news and our newsletter. You know, are people really reading it? Can we just take that away? With the knowledge, you know, thinking that that's what we're going to do. But now we print our newsletter still, because that was a big thing in the survey. People still wanted that print, especially for our older people in the congregation. And so we thought, okay, so we've reduced the number of copies. We thought, well, maybe we can get by with 50. Every week, you know, you're still printing a few more because they're all out. People pick them up all the time. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of surprises you can come upon when you're doing the survey. And like he was saying, with different channels require different things. There are people that do enjoy the longer newsletter. Like, they do like to take it home and read it on a Sunday afternoon and learn everything that's going on. And there's a lot of, I might do that version of something for Facebook, but for Twitter, I do a quick line and let you know what's going on, and that's it. So some people like the brief and the short, the one-page newsletter, and maybe you can have 2 versions. Maybe that's something that, and you can feel out if your audience, if that's something that they want. But that's a really good point. Yeah.
Well, I work with Rebecca at the seminary, and one of the things going into this thing was I hate Blue News. It drives me nuts. It's too long. It's too much information. It's a dreadful email. It's a terrible system in every way in my world. But
Yeah, it kind of is.
is where your audience is listening. And what we heard repeatedly in the survey is, no, Blue News is really working. It just needs tweaks. It needs some changes. And I wasn't really prepared to accept that going in. I'm still not entirely happy with where we've ended up, but I will admit that I read Blue News every day now. And so there's something there. And because we had so much of our campus community that had been trained for so long to, you know, you read it here, you know, in the church you read it in the newsletter, wherever that is. If they're already listening there, then try to get them to change channels. That's hard.
Yeah.
So take advantage of what you got there.
Yeah. I was also disappointed that the Blue News wasn't, because I honestly had it snoozed for a while. It would go to a file because it was cluttering my inbox, and I'm like, I'll get to this later. But yeah, now that we have the newest information at the top, I tend to read it a little more, because I'm like, oh, what's immediate? And then the rest, if I have time, I can go through. So yeah, that's a good point. It might surprise you that a communication channel you don't love is beloved by the people.
We started doing in our print because we realized it wasn't super popular. It's, like I said, it's fairly old school. And so every so often we'll put in, like, if you fill out this survey, you can enter for a $50 gift card. If you've read this sentence and say, come up to me after worship service and say this word, you will be entered in for a gift card. And then you really realize if someone's reading it or not. And we were confirmed that most people are not reading it because 2 people submitted for a $50 gift card.
Oh, wow.
Getting one. So we're like, good job.
It was like, send me a link. Yeah, that's interesting, because like anytime, it's hard to provide incentives because we're not made of money. We can't be always giving out gift cards. But and of course that one didn't like actually incentivize me. But if there is a way, oh yeah. What?
We actually did that. I don't know if you knew or not. The financial aid office slipped it in for a scholarship at one point.
She didn't read it.
It was snoozed.
Caught it or not.
And I'm like the communications person. It's like, yeah, because there were a few times that I asked somebody, I'm like, so what was the detail on this? Or I was confirming, and they're like, it was in the Blue News. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go read it then, I guess. Yeah.
So we are debating the school newsletter. What should we do different? I feel like I'm the preschool director at the church. So we have 2 different forms of communication, right? But So the church office put out an I-sign for information about the Easter egg, which is 2 months away. And I took it off. I said, I don't want that on there, and I'll put it back on. But I think it needs to be on. Is there a time where it's too early? Because it's like, well, we have to get it on there so people know. Yeah, but they'll stop looking at it. And so then, the 2 weeks before, they don't remember anymore, so they quit looking at that one. It's been on for 2 months.
I think it excuse me. I think it depends on the type of event. Some of our events, we promote them like a 3-month, 1 month, and then closer within the month. And so that's like our symposia, our bigger events, and we want to make people aware, get it on your calendar, maybe a choir tour or something like that. For an Easter egg hunt, especially if it's targeted toward parents and kids, speaking as a parent who's, gone through that whole thing, I think that closer to the event is really, and I know that's a hard case to make because you want to get it on the calendar, but parents are dealing with so much paperwork already. Like, papers are you love them, but you hate them. It's like everywhere. So I think, again, with less noise and getting it closer to the event, I think you'll be more successful.
Well, the other thing too is, and I'm not good at this, but just 20 years, 30 years of experience. The format doesn't change, so that you make the screen for the Easter egg hunt, and this is just one example, and that's all you ever see is that same thing. Whereas I will change it.
Okay.
So it'll be like, I might pop it up there so they know the date's coming down, take it off for a little while, and then I'll change what it looks like and put it up closer to the event. But that's not what happens. Church office.
That's hard.
Yeah.
So you have completely separate, you send something to, is it mainly the preschool parents?
Right.
And then they have their main church.
Yeah, we have a couple TVs in the church, so we've got a screen that we can pop announcements on, and then they use that on the plane in the church. So we make slides for that, and I'll make them about preschool, and we have access to each other's screens.
Okay.
They'll pop stuff up about church events because we want to share those, which is
Yeah.
fine. It's just, I'm like, okay, wait, my parents don't need this yet.
It's hard when you're of different mindsets. And I do like the idea of changing with the new picture, the new logo. Because if you've seen it before, your eyes just glaze over and you don't even, it's like sometimes signs on the doors. If you put them up too early, you walk in the door, you never look at it. So the gently getting on the same page. Sometimes it helps when I reference resources. Like, there was a study I came across that, like, when you do a new logo, if you reference something outside of yourself as an authority. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You can say that I went to see a communications professional at the best practices, and she said, yeah, use me. Like, give them my card. Yeah, totally. Because really, and I feel like I'm saying it in a kind of a teasing way, but also, I would super love, I really want the identity of the seminary to be a resource for everybody. Like, we're serving the church, we want to put workers into the field, but we want to, we have so many theological resources, and we have communications resources and other things. And I have plenty of cards if you want to call me or email me or whatever. And I could even email that person for you. I'm not mad at that, so yeah.
One framework we use that's been really helpful is to give up on what you want to say, and instead start from the audience point of view and say, okay, what does this person need to hear from me in order to behave in the way I want? And I don't mean that in a manipulative way. If the goal is that the preschool parents bring their kids to the Easter egg hunt, what do they need to hear and when in order to make that happen? Not, here's all the information that's precious to me and I want to spit it all out there everywhere.
It's a hard balance to strike sometimes.
Removing the noise so that you can get your message very clearly to the people, right time, right info.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot
Yeah,
of
so-
times, you realize that your humor works.
Yeah.
All of us are doing it, we live it, day in and day out. Those that we're trying to message to don't. And distancing yourself to that point is always a challenge. To say, okay, what is it that they do need to hear? What is it that they really want to know? As opposed to, I'm going to give you everything, or I'm going to give you nothing because I know it all. That's that struggle, that balance. But to come to that realization, that take that step back to say, what am I messaging to and why?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay, I'm gonna come from a different direction.
cool.
I'm an intentional interim pastor.
Okay.
He's gone into a congregation. The pastor who left there made the determination he was going to turn the church and school totally technology.
Okay.
And so he did in a matter of 2 weeks. Okay?
Everybody cringed simultaneously.
He established something totally different. Okay? Then over time, with COVID hitting, and I'm talking about all the communication process, with strictly, we're no longer going to be using this, we're going to be specifically here and so on. Then over COVID, because of family issues and health issues and other kinds of things, he shut that down too.
He shut down the technology moving.
Because he was the only one running it.
Oh,
He was
wow!
the
What a
only one
wild
running it.
ride.
So right now, and then he's left.
Yeah.
And nobody knows much of anything about much of it. So it's working hit, miss, and other kinds of things.
Yeah.
So basically, as an intentional interim student, now this has a full parochial school besides a church. The parochial school is still got their means of communication with the families. But there's no communication between the school and the church anymore. And there's literally no communication, no newsletter, no nothing that goes. They have a few blurbs in the bulletin about what's going on in the following week.
Okay.
In other words, they're basically going to have to start over completely with communication
Wow.
within the congregation. Where do we start?
How fun for you guys. Yeah. How big is your organization, or how big is the church and school together?
Okay, the church on the books has about 800.
Okay.
It worships much less than that. Because of COVID, there are over 200 students in the school. So it's a pretty good sized school. And so you're getting these tensions between the two and so on. So I'm also trying to deal with a rift between, those people in the church who don't think they even need a school versus the school who says the church would collapse without it. And those kinds of things. So there's a real challenge here.
Absolutely.
He did not do the congregation or school any favor by just insisting that we're going to make this change and we're going to make it now and it's just going to be complete and I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So as an intentional interim, I'm coming in trying to work with the school, with the congregation, and communication has come up as a huge issue. Everybody recognizes there's the huge issue. So, and I'm not going to be the permanent pastor, so
Yeah.
I'm not staying.
Yeah.
So I have to start setting up circumstance or avenues here. Where do we start? And where do I lead the people? Because again, my mindset is I can't start it. They've got to take ownership of it. They've got to move forward with it. They've got to be doing what they can do. Because I'm not going to stay and I'm not going to do what the other guy did, set up something and then I leave. And
Do you? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, before that passed, what was your form of communication between the church and congregation and the school?
they had a newsletter
Maybe start
and they
there.
had their sign-up sheets in the church for attendance and so on. He ripped all of that out. He went totally to kiosks. Out of the 6 kiosks on a given Sunday, maybe they can get 2 to work to register people in for services and so on. I mean, because nobody knows how to work the system.
I feel like that's a good point. I mean, there's the sense of don't reinvent the wheel. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Like if there was something that was working before, especially since this is a kind of a temporary season. And a newsletter, it does take work, but it seems like a ready-made solution to at least start somewhere. And also, do you have any freedom to hire even like a part-time tech person or communications person, because even or
Talking about it, but,
volunteer sometimes. I've done some volunteer tech stuff, and even if it's just, a few hours a week or like an hour a week, just anywhere you can get little bits of help, maybe reaching out to the congregation, seeing if this is where you could feel possibly called to serve the congregation, because this is a gift you could use to help the church. So that's another thing that you could use. I feel like every church needs, there is a talk going on that every church needs an IT guy somewhere on the yeah.
I know.
I think there's something to be said about what you started going down that road of where were you, before this all happened, because that institutional memory is still there and still raw.
Okay, that would be going back probably 4 years.
Okay, maybe not that far, but asking the questions of what was working. If all of this isn't, but everybody in the room to have that conversation. Take some of the things out of the conversation of, if it isn't working, we're not going to do it for right now. And even so far as to say, you mentioned you've got physical hardware that's there that isn't working or isn't being managed or things like that. Sometimes, so there is something to be said about literally just getting it out of the way, because then people, or put it in a closet, whatever, so that it's not on people's minds as they're walking into the building. It just rips the Band-Aid off again every time that they see it. So there's that aspect of it, of trying to reduce some of the conflict that each person is going to have with what's happened over the last 4 years. But also to say, okay, what is that lowest barrier to entry of finding a way to get us to start working together? Whether it's a simple newsletter that everybody at least just talks about once a week, once a month, whatever. Because the school, like you said, is working while they have the communication. They're going to keep doing what's working for them. That's the hard part. You've got that dysfunctionality in the church side of it, where I think some of them are also going to be looking at the school of, well, they're not listening to us. No, they're doing what they need to do to manage their part of the ministry.
Yeah, they're doing what they needed to do to survive.
Right.
In the midst of this. This congregation also that with COVID, he shut down worship services almost a full year,
That's hard.
where they didn't meet together at all.
That's hard.
And so this congregation is restarting in many, many ways. And communication is going to have to be a huge piece of this restart.
The nice thing for you as an intentional interim as well, the nice thing is that you can suggest things that somebody who's there for a while might not be able to suggest. But what you just said is spot on. You're restarting. And everything that comes with that needs to be talked about, whether people want to accept it or not. To get to that point is the hard part.
Yeah.
Starting at that lowest common denominator, I mean, paper is easy. I mean, we all recognize newsletters take work. I don't mean to diminish that, but there's no reason to suddenly make, a podcast of your weekly announcement. Get something working, and then from there start evaluating, okay, where are people listening, and how do we take the next steps? Or leave that to the next guy, because it sounds like it's his problem.
And I think also relationship building is going to be huge there too. Like and I know you know that as a pastor, but just being a face, a presence at the school, talking to some people that maybe are feeling a little anxious and angsty about things, and finding out what their problems are with it. And, even just asking them how their family is and whatever, the more that you build relationships with people, the more they're willing to hear you out on maybe some of these things that we might want to be trying. And even the people in the congregation that aren't connecting with the school, I've seen a lot of congregations that have done like a adopt a grandparent thing, maybe connect somebody to a kid in the school, or putting the kids' art up in the narthex but any way that you can bridge that gap.
We've already started some things.
That's awesome.
In those directions, but I'm looking specifically at what do we do with communication? Because then, I had one-on-ones with the congregation members.
Oh, that's great.
And a month and a half visit with 130 people.
Wow.
So trying just to listen. But, and everybody was talking about, we don't know what's going on. we don't know what this, we have no idea about this, we don't know, you know, and so as I'm working with the elders and the council and so on, I just, here's one of your greatest issues. We need to start on now. You know, and what ideas, and that's part of why I came here, to get some ideas on things that I can take back to this congregation and say, you know, like the survey stuff, to do some kind of survey stuff of where they would like to get information and those kinds of things is going to be important, which is why I was here. So
Very good.
But yeah, this is one of my bigger challenges as an interim.
I could see that. I think how you're approaching it though is you've had a good start, especially meeting with people and the newsletter. I think you're on a good path. Oh, yes.
One of the things that we did with our committee is we formed a committee to do our communication audit, but we made sure we had people that were maybe those older folks that would like that paper print versus those younger people that you know, would rather have technology. So from where you're at, somebody from the school side that wants to have communication with the church, somebody from the church side, you know, getting them together so then you have all avenues so that you can understand one another and then go forward so then you can see what everybody needs.
And then it's all cohesive. The
Yeah.
same logo and the same font and the same color.
I like everybody having a seat at the table, representing all the different, that's really cool. Yeah.
I was just going to say, our church does a weekly leadership team meeting.
Oh, cool.
So the principal's there, the youth director's there, the business administrators there, pastors there, and then they can all keep each other updated or discuss things they're frustrated with or whatever. They start with a Bible study and then they launch into that.
That's
So
awesome.
Maybe just physically pulling them all together, those representatives that you have, and start with them first and then bring it out.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I saw you had your hand up before. Did you have something?
Some of it's been covered, but I think I see two things. One is short-term and one is long-term. And those need to be specifically separate. The short-term has been spoken of, and I think to do what's easiest that works. Get something started. But maybe, and also a task force that between the school and the church that can come together and say, what do we want, what do we need, how can we work together? And if not between the two, at least a task force from the church itself for long term.
Yeah, I think linking those two together, seeking out leaders in the congregation and empowering them to be part of the conversation is really important. Like, look for the people with leadership qualities and kind of seek them out. Like, would you want to be part of this team? I mean, feel free to invite people, and that way you get, like, we got a lot of seats at the table and leadership meeting and looking at the long term and all that. I think that would be cool.
Which is difficult to do for an interim who doesn't know 90% of the people.
Yeah, maybe you pick one that you're like, oh gosh, why did I do that? No, I have to meet with them every week.
But you have people that you do know. One or two
You've got good
help you.
senses for people. I mean, you've been in ministry long enough where I think you have a good, I trust, and prayer, of course, pray over all of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's been going on for a while.
You're like, honey child, let me tell you. Very good. Well, any other questions? I love all of you guys' input. I feel like you taught me a bunch too, and I love that you're all helping each other because we're all in this boat together. So I do have business cards if anybody wants me to be the bad guy for them. I'm just kidding. But, and also if you want to follow up, ask me any questions, or yeah, just have a chat. I always like talking to people. So yeah. Thank you guys so much for coming. Yeah, oh yeah. I'll do a tour. Thank you so much for coming. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you.
It's a mine. That far from Fort Worth.
Hey, you know what? Ooh, I spilled my coffee.